Ethan Blackwood never expected his arranged marriage to Eleanor Sinclair to be anything more than a business deal, until the night she revealed her true self. As secrets unravel and power struggles rise, will their unexpected connection turn into real love, or will their pasts tear them apart? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The Blackwood building towered over downtown, its glass windows reflecting the morning sun like a giant mirror. On the top floor, Ethan Blackwood stood at the window of his office, looking down at the city that his family had helped build over 3 generations. At 35, he was now the CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, one of the largest real estate development companies in the country. "Mr. Blackwood, your father is here to see you." His assistant's voice came through the intercom. Ethan sighed. His father rarely visited the office since retiring 5 years ago, which meant this wasn't a casual visit. "Send him in, Karen," Richard E. Blackwood walked in with the confidence of a man who had spent decades commanding rooms. Though in his 70s now, he still stood tall, his silver hair perfectly combed, his expensive suit tailored to hide the slight softening of his once athletic frame. "Son," he said simply, not bothering with pleasantries. "Dad, this is unexpected." Ethan gestured to the sitting area. "What brings you here?" Richard sat down heavily on the leather sofa. "I've just had lunch with George Sinclair." Ethan nodded, as he took a seat across from his father. George Sinclair was his father's oldest friend and business partner. "How is he?" "Not well, I'm afraid. His heart isn't what it used to be." Richard paused, his expression unreadable. "We've sealed the deal on the merger." "That's good news," Ethan said cautiously. The merger between Blackwood Enterprises and Sinclair Properties had been in the works for months. It would make them the biggest player in the market, effectively crushing their competition. "There's more." Richard leaned forward. "George has a daughter, Eleanor." "Yes, I think I've heard her name mentioned." In truth, Ethan knew very little about George Sinclair's daughter, only that she worked somewhere in the Sinclair company, keeping a low profile. "She's 30, unmarried, and she'll inherit everything when George is gone." Richard's eyes fixed on his son. "We've made a deal, George and I. You're going to marry Eleanor." Ethan laughed, but the sound died in his throat when he saw his father. "Wasn't joking. You can't be serious." "I'm dead serious. The merger is conditional on this marriage. George wants to ensure his daughter is taken care of, and I want to make sure no outsider gets control of Sinclair Properties when he's gone." Richard's tone was matter-of-fact, as if discussing nothing more significant than a regular business transaction. "This is the 21st century, Dad. People don't have arranged marriages anymore. People like us do what's necessary for the family business." Richard stood up. "The engagement will be announced next week at the charity gala. You'll meet Eleanor there." "And what if I refuse?" Ethan challenged, though he already knew the answer. Richard's expression hardened. "Then I'll name your cousin Philip as my successor. He's more than willing to do what's needed for the family." Philip had been waiting in the wings for years, hoping for Ethan to slip up. The thought of his smug face taking over what Ethan had worked so hard for was unbearable. "You've got to be kidding me," Ethan muttered. "Do I look like I'm kidding?" Richard walked to the door. "Eleanor will be at the Parkview restaurant tomorrow at noon. Take her to lunch. Get to know your future wife." After his father left, Ethan poured himself a drink, his mind racing. He had always known that love was a luxury in their world. His own parents' marriage had been a strategic alliance, cold and formal. He had seen the same pattern repeated among his wealthy peers. Still, he had hoped to avoid the same fate. He pulled up his laptop and searched for Eleanor Sinclair. There wasn't much online, no social media profiles, just a few mentions in charity newsletters and one blurry photo from a company event where she stood in the background. From what he could make out, she was plain-looking, her hair pulled back, severely, glasses hiding most of her face. "Great," he muttered, "just great." Eleanor Sinclair sat at her desk in the accounting department of Sinclair Properties, carefully reviewing the quarterly reports. She preferred working with numbers. They were predictable, logical, and didn't judge her based on appearances. Her phone buzzed with a message from her father. "It's done. You're meeting Ethan Blackwood for lunch tomorrow. Eleanor's stomach knotted. She had hoped her father would change his mind, that he'd realize forcing her into marriage was extreme, even for securing the business. But George Sinclair was old-fashioned and stubborn, especially since her mother's death 3 years ago. Eleanor? Her assistant Maggie appeared at the door. Your father wants to see you in his office. She found her father behind his large mahogany desk, looking tired. His once robust frame had thinned considerably in recent months, and worry lines had deepened around his eyes. You've heard from Richard? She asked, though she already knew the answer. Yes, Ethan has agreed. George Sinclair gestured for her to sit. This is for the best, Eleanor. The Blackwoods are a good family. Ethan is a good man. A good man who's being forced to marry a woman he's never met, Eleanor pointed out. He's practical like his father. He understands what's at stake. George sighed. Listen, I know this isn't what you wanted, but my time is running out and I need to know you'll be taken care of. I can take care of myself, Dad. I have a degree in finance. I work in this company. The business world is still a man's world. Eleanor, you're too gentle for it. He reached across the desk to take her hand. Ethan will protect you and the company when I'm gone. Eleanor bit back her frustration. Her father had never seen her as capable enough to run the company, despite her education and years of working there. In his eyes, she was still the shy, awkward girl who preferred books to parties. What if he's horrible? What if we hate each other? She asked. Then you'll have a marriage like many others in our circle, cordial, respectful, and focused on business. Her father's expression softened. But who knows? Maybe you'll grow to care for each other. Eleanor doubted it. She had seen photos of Ethan Blackwood in business magazines, tall, impeccably dressed, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. Men like him dated models and socialites, not plain bookish women like her. What should I wear tomorrow? She asked. Resigned. Just be yourself, her father said. The problem was, Eleanor wasn't sure who herself really was anymore. The Parkview restaurant was busy when Ethan arrived the next day. He spotted her immediately at a corner table, Eleanor Sinclair looking exactly like her photo. Her brown hair was pulled back in a tight bun, thick glasses obscured her eyes, and her outfit was completely forgettable. She wore no jewelry except a simple silver watch, and her makeup, if she wore any at all, was invisible. She stood up when she saw him approaching, offering a small, nervous smile. Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice surprisingly pleasant. Thank you for meeting me. Ethan, please, he said, shaking her hand. Her grip was firmer than he expected. Since we're apparently getting married, we should be on a first-name basis, don't you think? He saw her cheeks flush slightly as they sat down. This situation is unusual, Eleanor said after they had ordered. That's one way to put it, Ethan replied dryly. I'm curious, are you as thrilled about this arrangement as I am? How you mean being forced to marry a stranger for business reasons? The corner of her mouth lifted slightly. It's a dream come true. Ethan found himself smiling at her unexpected sarcasm. At least we agree on something. Their conversation remained polite, but distant throughout lunch. Eleanor was clearly intelligent, asking insightful questions about the merger, and offering her own thoughts on how the companies could integrate smoothly. But she revealed almost nothing personal about herself, deflecting his questions with brief, vague answers. So, Ethan said as they finished their meal, since it seems we can't get out of this, how do you want to proceed? Eleanor looked at him directly for the first time. Behind those thick glasses, her eyes were an interesting shade of hazel. I think we should be honest with each other. This is a business arrangement, not a love match. I don't expect you to love me or even to be faithful as long as you're discreet. Her bluntness surprised him. That's practical. I'm a practical person, Ethan. We both know why this marriage is happening. Let's not pretend otherwise. As he drove back to his office, Ethan felt strangely unsettled. Eleanor Sinclair was nothing like he had expected. Yes, she was plain and unmemorable in appearance, but there was something about her direct manner that had caught him off guard. 1 week later, the engagement was announced at the annual charity gala hosted by the Blackwood Foundation. Eleanor stood beside Ethan, uncomfortable in the designer dress her father had insisted she wear. It was beautiful but felt wrong on her, like she was playing dress-up in someone else's clothes. "Smile," Ethan whispered as another photographer approached. "You look like you're at a funeral. Isn't that what this is? The death of our freedom to choose our own partners?" she whispered back. His lips twitched. "Good point." The night passed in a blur of fake smiles and congratulations. Eleanor noticed the looks of surprise and sometimes pity from the women who circled Ethan like beautiful butterflies. They clearly couldn't understand what someone like him saw in someone like her. By the time they escaped to the terrace for a moment of quiet, Eleanor's face hurt from smiling. "We should set a date," Ethan said, leaning against the railing. "The sooner we get this over with, the better." "How romantic," Eleanor replied. "But yes, I agree. My father's health isn't good. I'd like him to be there." Ethan studied her. "You really care about him, don't you? Despite what he's forcing you to do." "He's my father. Of course I care about him." She looked out at the city. Lights. "He thinks he's doing what's best for me. My father doesn't bother with such pretenses. This is about power and money, plain and simple." Ethan shook his head. 6 weeks from now? Small ceremony? Just family and close friends?" Eleanor nodded. "That sounds reasonable." As they returned to the party, Ethan found himself wondering what Eleanor would look like if she smiled, really smiled, not the polite curve of lips she had shown throughout the evening. The thought surprised him. What did it matter what she looked like when she smiled? This was business, nothing more. The wedding day arrived with surprising speed. Eleanor stood in the bridal suite of the Blackwood estate, staring at herself in the mirror. The white dress was elegant and simple, chosen by the wedding planner Ethan's family had hired. Her hair was still in its usual severe style, her glasses firmly in place. "Are you sure about this, Ellie?" asked Maggie, her assistant and only real friend who was serving as her maid of honor. "You're about to marry a man who barely knows you, who has no idea who you really are." Eleanor took a deep breath. "It's too late to back out now, and it's better this way. But what about your plan? To show him the real you after the wedding?" "I'm still going to do it," Eleanor said, touching the contact lenses and makeup kit hidden in her overnight bag. "Tonight, after the ceremony. When we're alone." She had a point to prove, not just to Ethan but to herself. If she was going to be trapped in a loveless marriage, she at least wanted to know if her husband could see beyond appearances. The ceremony passed in a fog. Eleanor was aware of her father looking frail but proud beside her, of Ethan's solid presence as they exchanged vows, of the small crowd of witnesses. But it all felt like a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, from which she couldn't wake up. "You may kiss the bride," the minister said. Ethan leaned down and pressed his lips briefly against hers, their first kiss perfunctory and cold. The guests applauded, unaware of the emptiness behind the gesture. Hours later, after the reception, they arrived at Ethan's penthouse, where they would spend the night before leaving for a honeymoon. Neither of them wanted, but appearances demanded. "Your room is through there," Ethan said, pointing to a door off the main living area. "I've had your things brought up." Eleanor nodded, clutching her overnight bag. "Thank you." An awkward silence fell between them. "Well, good night then," Ethan said finally, turning toward what she assumed was his own room. "Ethan," she called after him, "could we talk for a moment? There's something I need to show you." He turned back, eyebrows raised in question. "What is it?" "Give me 5 minutes. I'll meet you in the living room." Eleanor went into her room and closed the door, heart pounding. This was it, the moment of truth. She opened her bag and took out the small makeup kit and contact lens case. With shaking hands, she removed her glasses and put in the contacts. Then she unpinned her hair, letting it fall in soft waves around her shoulders. Finally, she wiped away the makeup she had carefully applied to dull her features and applied new makeup that enhanced rather than hid her natural beauty. When she was done, she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. Gone was the plain, forgettable Eleanor Sinclair. In her place stood a woman with striking hazel eyes, high cheekbones, full lips, and a graceful neck that the severe hairstyle had always hidden. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and stepped back into the living room. Ethan was standing by the window, his back to her. Eleanor, what did you want to talk? He turned and froze, his eyes widening in shock. Hello, Ethan, she said softly. I thought it was time you met your real wife. Ethan stared at Eleanor, his mouth open in shock. The woman standing before him looked nothing like the one he had married just hours ago. This woman was stunning, with luminous hazel eyes, full lips, and shining hair that framed a face of remarkable beauty. Eleanor? He finally managed, taking a step toward her. Is that really you? She nodded, her chin lifting slightly. Yes, this is the real me. But why? Ethan gestured at her, confusion and something like anger crossing his face. Why would you hide like that? Why would you deliberately make yourself look less than you are? Because I wanted to know if you could see past appearances, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I wanted to know if you could value me for my mind, for who I am inside, not just for how I look. Ethan ran a hand through, his hair struggling to process this revelation. So this was some kind of test. You've been deceiving me from the start. I prefer to think of it as protecting myself, Eleanor replied. In my experience, men like you only value women for their beauty. I needed to know if you were different. Men like me? Ethan's voice hardened. You don't know anything about me, don't I? The famous Ethan Blackwood, always photographed with a model or actress on his arm. Eleanor walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. I've read the society pages. I know your type. So, you decided to judge me before even giving me a chance. Ethan shook his head. That's pretty hypocritical for someone concerned about being judged by appearances. His words stung because they held truth. Eleanor turned to face him. Maybe you're right, but can you honestly tell me you would have treated me the same way if you'd seen me like this from the beginning? Ethan opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. He couldn't lie, not when they both knew the truth. If Eleanor had looked like this at their first meeting, he would have been far more enthusiastic about their arranged marriage. That's what I thought, Eleanor said softly, seeing the answer in his eyes. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. So what happens now? Ethan finally asked. We're married, that's a fact. Where does this revelation leave us? Eleanor had thought about this moment for weeks, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure what she wanted. I don't know. I guess we go on as planned, a marriage of convenience. You do your thing, I do mine. Just like that after dropping this bombshell? Ethan's frustration was evident. You can't just do something like this and expect everything to stay the same. What do you want from me, Ethan? Eleanor challenged. I'm still the same person I was this morning when you married me. The only difference is how I look. Ethan shook his head. No, the difference is that you didn't trust me enough to show me who you really are. How are we supposed to build any kind of relationship, even a business one, without trust? His words hit home. Eleanor hadn't considered that her deception might damage the foundation of their arrangement. I'm going to bed, Ethan said when she didn't respond. We can talk more in the morning. We still have a honeymoon to get through, whether we like it or not. After he left, Eleanor sank onto the sofa, the reality of her situation crashing down on her. She was married to a man who now had even more reasons to resent their arrangement. What had she been thinking? The morning brought sunshine streaming through the windows and a tense breakfast as they both tried to navigate their new reality. Your father called, Ethan said, breaking the silence. He wanted to make sure we're still planning to visit him before we leave for the honeymoon. Eleanor nodded, hiding behind a curtain of hair that she'd left loose. She felt strangely vulnerable without her glasses and severe hairstyle. Like armor she'd worn for so long, she felt naked without it. Are you going to keep up this new appearance? Ethan asked, watching her over his coffee cup. Does it matter to you? She countered. I'd prefer honesty going forward, he said simply. Whatever face you want to show the world is your business, but I'd like to know who I'm coming home to. His words surprised her. Coming home to? I thought we'd live separately after the honeymoon. Is that what you want? Ethan frowned. It would look strange, don't you think? The newlyweds living in different houses after a few weeks of marriage. He had a point. Their marriage was supposed to project stability for both families' businesses, Living separately would spark rumors. I guess not, Eleanor conceded, but I need my own space. This penthouse has 4 bedrooms, a home office, and a library, Ethan said dryly. I think we can manage to give each other space. For the first time, a small smile tugged at Eleanor's lips. A library. Yes, through those doors. He nodded toward a set of double doors. Feel free to use it whenever you want. Curious, Eleanor walked over and opened the doors. Inside was a beautiful room lined with bookshelves from floor to ceiling, comfortable reading chairs by the windows, and a large desk in one corner. It was perfect. Thank you, she said softly, turning back to him. I love to read. I know, Ethan replied. Your father mentioned it when we were discussing the arrangements. I had the shelves restocked last week with titles I thought you might enjoy. Eleanor was touched by this unexpected thoughtfulness. Perhaps there was more to Ethan Blackwood than she had assumed. George Sinclair's eyes widened when Eleanor entered his hospital room, Ethan at her side. Eleanor? My God, you look just like your mother. She went to his bedside. Anne took his hand. Hi, Dad. You've finally decided to stop hiding, he said, his eyes misty. I've been waiting years for you to let the world see how beautiful you are. Eleanor felt a pang of guilt. Her father had never understood why she chose to downplay her appearance after her mother died. He didn't know about the unwanted attention, the men who had only seen her face and not her mind, the college professor who had made her life hell when she rejected his advances. You knew? Ethan asked, looking between father and daughter. Of course I knew, George said with a weak laugh. She's my daughter. A father always sees the truth. He squeezed Eleanor's hand. Your mother would be proud of you, sweetheart, for everything you've accomplished, not just for how you look. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. I miss her. So do I. Every day. George's expression grew serious as he turned to Ethan. Take care of my girl. She's stronger than she looks, but she needs someone to watch her back in this world. I will, sir, Ethan said, and Eleanor was surprised by the sincerity in his voice. Their honeymoon in the Maldives was a strange mix of awkwardness and unexpected moments of connection. They had separate rooms in their overwater bungalow, but they ate meals together and sometimes sat in comfortable silence on the deck watching the sunset. On their 3rd evening, as they walked along the beach after dinner, Ethan asked the question that had been on his mind since the wedding night. Why did you start hiding your appearance in the first place? Eleanor was quiet for so long that he thought she wasn't going to answer. My mother was beautiful, she finally said. Really beautiful. The kind of beauty that stops traffic. She was also brilliant. She had a PhD in economics and helped my father build his company from nothing. Eleanor kicked at the sand. But no one ever talked about her brain. It was always about how she looked. When she died, I was 27 and starting to get the same kind of attention. Men would ask me out, but they never listened when I talked. Business associates would dismiss my ideas until a man repeated them. She looked up at Ethan. So I decided to disappear. I changed how I looked, and suddenly people started hearing me. My ideas mattered more than my face. Ethan was silent, absorbing her words. I'm sorry that happened to you, he said finally, but you shouldn't have to hide who you are. Maybe not, Eleanor agreed, but it was easier than constantly fighting, to be seen as more than just a pretty face. For what it's worth, Ethan said carefully, I think you're the most interesting woman I've ever met, and that has nothing to do with how you look. Eleanor gave him a skeptical glance. You don't have to say that. I'm not the kind of man who says things I don't mean, Ethan replied. You're smart, direct, and you challenge me. That's rare in my world. A small warmth sparked in Eleanor's chest at his words, but she quickly tamped it down. Getting emotionally involved would only complicate their arrangement. They returned from their honeymoon to find both their faces splashed across the business magazines, with headlines speculating about the merger and their sudden marriage. One particularly gossip-heavy publication ran side-by-side photos of Eleanor, one from before the wedding with her glasses and severe hairstyle, and one from the airport upon their return, showing her transformed appearance. Blackwood Bride's shocking transformation, the headline screamed. Ethan tossed the magazine on the kitchen counter with disgust. Vultures! Eleanor picked it up and flipped through it, her expression unreadable. They're saying I had plastic surgery to keep you interested. Does that bother you? Ethan asked. She shrugged. I learned a long time ago not to care what people say about me. The people who matter know the truth. Ethan smiled slightly. That's a healthy attitude. What about you? Eleanor asked. Does it bother you that they're saying you married me for my father's company, and now you're stuck with a plain Jane who had to get surgery to please you? First of all, you were never plain, Ethan said firmly. Different, yes, understated certainly, but never plain. And second, I don't give a damn what they print. Our families know the truth, and that's all that matters. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding, perhaps even the beginning of real respect. The moment was broken by Ethan's phone ringing. He glanced at it and frowned. It's my father. I need to take this. Eleanor nodded and left him to his call, heading for the sanctuary of the library. She had just settled into one of the comfortable chairs with a book when Ethan appeared at the door, his expression grim. What's wrong? She asked, setting down her book. That was my father. Your father's had another heart attack. They've taken him to Memorial Hospital. Ethan held out his hand. Come on, I'll drive you. The hospital waiting room was cold and sterile. Eleanor sat with her head in her hands while Ethan paced nearby, making calls to ensure. George Sinclair had the best doctors available. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression told them everything. I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackwood, he said gently. We did everything we could, but your father's heart was too damaged. He passed away a few minutes ago. Eleanor felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Ethan was suddenly beside her, his arm around her, shoulders steadying her. Would you like to see him? The doctor asked. She nodded, unable to speak. Ethan walked with her to the room where her father lay, his face peaceful in death. Eleanor sank into the chair beside the bed and took her father's hand, now growing cold. Daddy, she whispered, tears flowing freely down her face. I'm so sorry. Ethan stood quietly by the door, giving her space to grieve. When she finally stood, her legs shaky, he was there to support her. I've got you, he said softly, his arm around her waist. Let's get you home. At the penthouse, Eleanor moved like a sleepwalker. Ethan guided her to the sofa and brought her a glass of water, then sat beside her, unsure what else to do. He had never been good at comforting people. He was all I had left, Eleanor said, her voice hollow. My mother, now him. I'm alone. You're not alone, Ethan said, surprising himself with his words. You have me now. Eleanor looked at him, her eyes red from crying. Do I? We barely know each other, Ethan. Our marriage is a business arrangement, remember? That doesn't mean I can't be here for you. He hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. Let me help you through this. Something in his voice, a sincerity she hadn't heard before, made Eleanor nod slowly. Okay. The days that followed were a blur of funeral arrangements, legal meetings, and condolence calls. Ethan stayed by Eleanor's side through all of it, handling business matters when she couldn't, and keeping well-meaning but intrusive visitors at bay when she needed space. At the funeral, Eleanor wore her glasses and pulled her hair back, not out of deception this time, but as a shield against the prying eyes of those who had come more out of curiosity than genuine grief. Ethan noticed but said nothing, simply offering his arm as they walked to the front pew of the church. His father sat on his other side, straight-backed and solemn. Afterward, as mourners filed past to offer condolences, Richard Blackwood pulled Ethan aside. I need to speak with you, he said in a low voice. Privately. Now is not the time, Dad, Ethan replied, his eyes on Eleanor as she accepted hugs and handshakes with quiet dignity. It's about the merger, Richard insisted. There's a complication. Whatever it is can wait. Ethan turned to his father, his expression firm. My wife just lost her father. Business comes second today. Richard's eyebrows rose at the protective tone in his son's voice. Your wife, is it? Not Eleanor or the Sinclair girl? Yes, my wife, Ethan said firmly, and I'm going back to her now. As he walked away, Richard watched his son with new interest. Perhaps this arranged marriage was turning out differently than expected. Back at home, Eleanor finally allowed herself to truly break down. Sitting on the floor of her bedroom, surrounded by old photo albums, she sobbed until no more tears would come. Ethan sat beside her, not speaking, just being present. When her tears finally subsided, she leaned against his shoulder, exhausted. "Thank you," she whispered, "for being here." Ethan put his arm around her shoulders, drawing her closer. "Where else would I be?" Eleanor looked up at him, struck by the genuine concern in his eyes. For the first time, she wondered if perhaps their marriage could be more than just a business arrangement. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan reached out to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. "Get some rest," he said softly. "Tomorrow will be better." He helped her to bed and was turning to leave when she caught his hand. "Stay," she said, "just until I fall asleep. I don't want to be alone right now." Ethan nodded and sat on the edge of the bed, holding her hand as her eyes drifted closed. Long after her breathing had evened out in sleep, he remained watching over her, a strange protectiveness growing in his heart. The reading of George Sinclair's will took place a week after the funeral. Eleanor sat beside Ethan in the lawyer's office, her face a careful mask as the details of her inheritance were laid out. She was now the majority shareholder of Sinclair Properties, with a substantial personal fortune as well. "There is one condition," the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. "Your father stipulated that your husband must serve as CEO of Sinclair Properties for a minimum of 1 year before you can take over, if you choose to do so." Eleanor stiffened beside him, and Ethan felt her hand tighten on the armrest of her chair. "What?" she said, her voice tight with anger. "That's ridiculous. I've worked in that company for years. I know it inside and out." The lawyer looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Blackwood, those are the terms." On the drive home, Eleanor was silent, staring out the window with her lips pressed into a thin line. "I know you're upset," Ethan said carefully. "But your father was just trying to protect you and the company." "Protect me?" Eleanor turned to him, her eyes flashing. "By handing over my inheritance to a man I barely know, by telling me I'm not capable of running the company I've worked in for almost a decade." "That's not what he was saying," Ethan argued. "He knew the business world can be cutthroat. He wanted to give you time to grieve, to adjust, before taking on that responsibility. And you're just happy to step in and take control, aren't you?" Eleanor's voice was bitter. "This is exactly what you and your father wanted all along." "That's not fair," Ethan said, his own temper rising. "I've been by your side through all of this. I've supported you, given you space when you needed it. I didn't have to do any of that." "No, you didn't," Eleanor agreed coldly. "After all, you already got what you wanted from this marriage, control of Sinclair Properties." Ethan pulled the car to a stop in front of their building and turned to face her. "Is that really what you think of me, after everything these past weeks?" For a moment, doubt flickered in Eleanor's eyes, but then she looked away. "I don't know what to think anymore." "Well, when you figure it out, let me know." Ethan got out of the car and handed the keys to the valet, not waiting to see if Eleanor followed. By the time she reached the penthouse, Ethan was nowhere to be seen. Eleanor found a note on the kitchen counter. "Gone to the office. Don't wait." Up. Alone in the large penthouse, Eleanor felt the weight of her grief and anger pressing down on her. Had she misjudged Ethan? Or had she been right all along about men like him, only interested in power and control? She didn't know the answer, but as she curled up in bed that night alone, she realized something that frightened her even more than her doubts. Somewhere along the way, she had started to care what Ethan Blackwood thought of her. And that was far more dangerous than any business complication. Meanwhile, in his office downtown, Ethan stared out at the city lights, a glass of scotch in his hand. Eleanor's accusation had stung, because part of him wondered if she was right. Had he really changed, or was he still the cold, calculating businessman his father had raised him to be? He thought of Eleanor's face at the hospital, the trust in her eyes when she'd asked him to stay until she fell asleep, the way something in his chest had tightened when she smiled at him for the first time on their honeymoon. "Damn it," he muttered, downing the rest of his drink. This was supposed to be a simple business arrangement. When had it gotten so complicated? 3 days passed with Eleanor and Ethan barely speaking to each other. She spent her days at Sinclair Properties trying to maintain a sense of normalcy despite her father's absence. Ethan threw himself into work at Blackwood Enterprises, coming home late each night after Eleanor had gone to bed. The tension between them hung in the air like a storm cloud, neither willing to be the first to break the silence. On the 4th day, Eleanor arrived at her father's, now her office, to find Ethan already there, reviewing files with her assistant Maggie. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor asked, stopping in the doorway. Ethan looked up, his face carefully neutral. "Good morning to you too. I'm reviewing the quarterly reports." "Why?" Eleanor set her purse down with more force than necessary. "Because according to your father's will, I'm now the CEO of this company." Ethan's tone was matter of fact. "I need to understand what I'm working with." Maggie glanced between them, clearly sensing the tension. "I'll leave these files for you to review, Mr. Blackwood. Mrs. Blackwood, your 10 o'clock appointment called to reschedule." After Maggie left, Eleanor crossed her arms over her chest. "You could have told me you were coming in today." "I tried," Ethan said. "You were already asleep when I got home last night, and you were gone before I woke up this morning." Eleanor had nothing to say to that. It was true she had been avoiding him. "Look," Ethan said with a sigh, "I know you're angry about the will. I understand that. But we're stuck with each other and with this situation. We can either work together or make each other miserable." "Fine," Eleanor said reluctantly. "What do you want to know about the company?" For the next 2 hours, they reviewed files together, Eleanor explaining the projects her father had been working on and the company's financial standing. Despite her initial resistance, she found herself impressed by Ethan's quick understanding and insightful questions. "You know," he said as they finished, "you'd make a good CEO yourself. Your grasp of the business is impressive." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "You think so?" "I do. Your father should have had more faith in you." Ethan closed the file he'd been reviewing. "Maybe we can use this year to prepare you to take over if that's what you want." "Why would you do that?" Eleanor asked, suspicious of his sudden support. "Because it's the right thing to do." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "This is your family's company. You deserve the chance to run it if you want to." Something shifted in Eleanor's perception of him. Perhaps he wasn't the cold, calculating businessman she had thought. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot to me." Ethan nodded, his expression softening slightly. "Have dinner with me tonight. We need to talk about how we're going to make this work. The companies, the merger, our arrangement." Eleanor hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, dinner." That evening, they sat across from each other at a small Italian restaurant where the dim lighting and quiet atmosphere offered privacy from curious eyes. "I've been thinking," Ethan said after they ordered. "We got off to a bad start, but that doesn't mean we can't make this work." "Define work," Eleanor said, taking a sip of her wine. "A partnership," Ethan replied. "We're both intelligent adults with similar goals. We want our companies to succeed. We both value honesty and directness. That's not a bad foundation." "For a business relationship," Eleanor clarified. Ethan studied her face. "Is that all you want this to be?" The question caught her off guard. "What else could it be? We barely know each other. We were forced into this marriage." "True," Ethan conceded, "but people have built successful marriages on less." Eleanor raised her eyebrows. "Are you saying you want a real marriage? With me?" "I'm saying I'm open to the possibility." Ethan leaned forward. "Before you showed me the real you, and I don't just mean your appearance, I was resigned to a cold, business-like arrangement. But these past weeks, I've seen someone I could grow to care about." Eleanor felt her heart beat faster at his words, but fear held her back. "How do I know this isn't just about my looks? Now that you've seen I'm not plain, maybe you're just willing to settle." "Is that what you think?" Ethan looked genuinely hurt. "After everything we've been through?" "I don't know what to think," Eleanor admitted. "My whole adult life I've been careful about who I let close to me. It's hard to change that overnight." "I'm not asking for overnight," Ethan said. "I'm asking for a chance. Let's get to know each other. Really know each other. No more masks, no more pretending." Eleanor considered his words. The idea was both terrifying and tempting. What exactly are you proposing? A fresh start, Ethan said. We date, like normal people. We learn about each other. We see where it goes. While being married and running companies together, Eleanor pointed out. Ethan smiled slightly. I admit it's not conventional, but then neither are we. For the first time in days, Eleanor felt herself smiling back. No, we're certainly not. The rest of dinner passed pleasantly, their conversation turning to lighter topics, books they'd enjoyed, places they'd traveled, childhood memories. By the time they left the restaurant, something had shifted between them. The tension was still there, but it had transformed into something else, a spark of possibility. And the following weeks brought a new rhythm to their lives. During the day, they worked together at Sinclair Properties, Ethan taking on the role of CEO, while making sure Eleanor was involved in every major decision. In the evenings, they began the strange process of dating while already married. They went to movies, tried new restaurants, and spent hours talking in the library of their penthouse. Eleanor gradually let her guard down, allowing Ethan to see more of her true self, her dry sense of humor, her passion for literature, her fierce intelligence. In turn, Ethan revealed parts of himself he rarely showed others, his love of classical music, his secret hobby of woodworking learned from his grandfather, his complicated relationship with his father. He always expected perfection, Ethan explained one evening as they sat in the library, a fire crackling in the fireplace. Any grade below an A was a failure. Any business deal that wasn't completely in our favor was a disappointment. That sounds lonely, Eleanor said softly. Ethan looked at her in surprise. I never thought of it that way. But yes, it is. My father doesn't know how to be anything but a businessman, even with his own son. My father was the opposite, Eleanor said, curling her feet under her on the sofa. After my mother died, he became overprotective. He couldn't bear the thought of losing me too. Is that why you went along with the arranged marriage? Ethan asked. To please him? Eleanor nodded. Partly. I also knew how much the merger meant to him. He'd worked his whole life building that company. Do you regret it? Ethan's voice was quiet. Marrying me? Eleanor looked at him, at the man who had become so much more than the cold businessman she had first met. No, she said honestly. I don't regret it. Something changed in Ethan's expression, a warmth entering his eyes that made Eleanor's heart skip. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her cheek. Eleanor, he said softly, leaning closer. The ringing of his phone shattered the moment. Ethan pulled back with a frustrated sigh and checked the screen. It's my father, I should take this. Eleanor nodded, her cheeks flushed, her heart racing at what had almost happened. Richard, Ethan said into the phone, his voice noticeably cooler. What is it? As he listened, his expression hardened. That's not what we agreed to. No, I won't do that to her. This isn't about the money anymore. After hanging up, Ethan paced the room, tension radiating from him. What's wrong? Eleanor asked. My father, Ethan said grimly. He wants to restructure the merger in a way that would essentially gut Sinclair Properties, sell off its assets, lay off most of the staff, and absorb what's left into Blackwood Enterprises. He can't do that, Eleanor said, standing up. The agreement was for an equal partnership. An agreement he made with your father, who's no longer here to enforce it. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He thinks I'll go along with it because I've always followed his lead in business. And will you? Eleanor asked, searching his face. No, Ethan said firmly. I won't betray your trust like that, or your father's memory. Relief flooded through Eleanor. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Ethan warned. My father won't take this well. He's used to getting his way. Richard Blackwood's response came the very next morning. He called an emergency board meeting at Blackwood Enterprises, one that Ethan, as CEO of Sinclair Properties, wasn't officially required to attend. I should be there, Ethan said as he hurriedly dressed. He's planning something. I'm coming with you, Eleanor insisted. This involves my company too. When they arrived at Blackwood Enterprises, the board meeting was already underway. Richard stood at the head of the table, looking confident and in control. Ethan, he said as they entered. And Eleanor, How nice of you to join us. What are you doing, Dad? Ethan asked, his voice hard. Just discussing the future of our company. Richard gestured to the presentation on the screen behind him, which showed a restructuring plan for both companies. I was just explaining to the board how the Sinclair acquisition will be handled. Acquisition? Eleanor stepped forward. Sinclair Properties is not being acquired. The agreement was for a merger of equals. Richard's smile was condescending. My dear, business conditions change. Your father is no longer with us, and without his leadership, Sinclair Properties isn't the powerhouse it once was. That's not true, Ethan said, moving to stand beside Eleanor. Sinclair Properties is as strong as ever. Eleanor and I have been reviewing the books. The company is thriving. Perhaps, Richard conceded, but the board agrees with me that this new arrangement would be more profitable. Ethan looked around the table at the board members, most of whom had worked with his father for decades. They avoided his gaze. This isn't right, Ethan said firmly, and I won't be part of it. You don't have a choice, Richard replied. The board has already voted to proceed. You may be CEO of Sinclair now, but you're still a minority shareholder in Blackwood Enterprises. You can't stop this. Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes flashing with anger. Actually, he can, because as of last week, I transferred 15% of my Sinclair shares to Ethan. The room fell silent. Richard stared at her in shock. What? He finally managed. It was a wedding gift, Eleanor said coolly. One that gives Ethan enough voting power to block any hostile takeover attempt. You can check the paperwork, Ethan added. It's all legal and binding. Richard's face flushed with anger. You went behind my back? Your own father? I learned from the best, Ethan replied. Isn't that what you always taught me? To anticipate my opponent's moves? This isn't over, Richard warned. The board still supports me. Perhaps, Ethan agreed. But they should know that if this plan goes forward, Eleanor and I will take Sinclair Properties private again. We'll dissolve the merger completely, and Blackwood will lose its most valuable partnership in decades. Murmurs broke out among the board members. Richard glared at his son, seeing him perhaps for the first time not as a dutiful heir, but as a worthy opponent. We'll continue this discussion later, Richard said tersely, dismissing the meeting. As the board members filed out, Richard approached Ethan and Eleanor. You're making a mistake, he said in a low voice. Both of you. No, Dad, Ethan replied. For the first time in my life, I'm doing what's right instead of what's profitable, and it feels good. After Richard stormed out, Eleanor turned to Ethan. I should have told you about the shares. I was going to surprise you, but then all this happened. It was a timely surprise, Ethan said with a small smile. Though I'm curious, why did you do it? A week ago, you barely trusted me. Eleanor looked up at him. People change. You showed me I could trust you when you stood by me after my father died. When you offered to help me learn to run the company myself. Not many men in your position would do that. Ethan took her hand. Thank you for believing in me. We make a good team, Eleanor said softly. Yes, Ethan agreed, his eyes warm as they met hers. We do. The confrontation with Richard marked a turning point. Word spread quickly through both companies that the young Blackwoods had stood up to the old lion. To everyone's surprise, the news was largely met with approval. Richard's ruthless business tactics had made him many enemies over the years, and the staff at Sinclair Properties were relieved that their jobs were secure. Your father isn't speaking to you, is he? Eleanor asked one evening a week after the board meeting. Ethan shook his head. Not a word. It's the silent treatment. His favorite punishment when I was growing up. I'm sorry, Eleanor said, genuinely concerned. I know how much his approval means to you. It used to, Ethan admitted, but I'm starting to realize that I've spent my whole life trying to please a man who's never satisfied. Maybe it's time to focus on what I want instead. And what do you want? Eleanor asked. Ethan looked at her, his eyes intense. Right now, to finish what we started the other night before my father called. Eleanor's breath caught as Ethan moved, closer to her on the sofa. This time, when he cupped her face in his hands, there was no interruption. His lips met hers in a kiss that started gentle, but quickly deepened with a passion that surprised them both. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for weeks." "Me too," Eleanor admitted, her hands still clutching the front of his shirt. "So where do we go from here?" Ethan asked. Eleanor smiled. "For a start, I think we should move this to the bedroom. The real one, not our separate rooms." Ethan's eyes darkened with desire. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Eleanor said, taking his hand and standing up. "I think it's time we acted like a real married couple, don't you?" The next morning, Eleanor woke to find Ethan watching her, a soft smile on his face. "What?" she asked, self-consciously tucking her hair behind her ear. "Just admiring my wife," he said, tracing a finger along her bare shoulder. "How you're beautiful when you sleep." "Only when I sleep," Eleanor teased. "No," Ethan said seriously. "You're beautiful all the time, and not just on the outside." He kissed her forehead. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Eleanor Blackwood." The word sent a thrill through her. "Even though our marriage was arranged? Even though I deceived you about who I really was?" "Maybe because of all that," Ethan said thoughtfully. "If we'd met under normal circumstances, I might never have gotten to know the real you. I might have been too distracted by your beauty to see your strength, your intelligence, your heart." Eleanor traced the line of his jaw with her fingertips. "I think I'm falling in love with you too. And it terrifies me." "Why?" Ethan caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Because I've spent years protecting myself from getting hurt, from being judged for my appearance instead of who I am. And now I've let you in, shown you everything. And I'm still here," Ethan finished for her, "and I'm not going anywhere." Their peaceful morning was interrupted by Ethan's phone ringing. He groaned but reached for it. "It's Philip, my cousin," he said with a frown before answering. "What is it, Philip?" Eleanor watched as Ethan's expression changed from irritation to shock. "When?" he demanded. "Is he all right?" After hanging up, Ethan turned to Eleanor, his face grave. "My father's had a heart attack. He's at Memorial Hospital." The hospital corridor was painfully familiar to Eleanor, bringing back memories of her own father's final days. She held Ethan's hand tightly as they waited for news. "Mr. Blackwood?" A doctor approached them. "Your father is stable. He had a mild heart attack, likely brought on by stress. We're keeping him for observation, but he should make a full recovery." Ethan let out a breath of relief. "Can I see him?" "Yes, but briefly. He needs rest." In the hospital room, Richard Blackwood looked smaller somehow, vulnerable in the hospital bed with monitors beeping around him. "Dad?" Ethan said softly, approaching the bed. Richard's eyes opened. "Ethan, you came." "Of course I came," Ethan said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "You're my father." Richard's gaze moved past Ethan to Eleanor, who stood near the door. "You brought her?" "Yes," Ethan said firmly. "Helena is my wife. We come as a package now." To their surprise, Richard gave a weak laugh. "You sound just like me when I was your age. Stubborn. Determined." "I learned from the best," Ethan said, echoing his words from their confrontation, but with a gentler tone. "This episode has given me time to think," Richard said, his voice strained. "Perhaps I've been too harsh, too focused on business at the expense of everything else." "Perhaps," Ethan agreed. "Your mother always said I'd regret it someday," Richard continued, "putting profit above family. I think she was right." Eleanor stepped forward. "Mr. Blackwood, I know we haven't had the best start, but Ethan loves you, and life is too short for regrets. My father died before we could resolve all our differences, and I would give anything for one more day with him." Richard looked at her with new respect. "You're a wise young woman, Eleanor. George raised you well." "Thank you," she said softly. "The merger," Richard began, but Ethan cut him off. "We can talk business later, Dad. Right now you need to rest and recover." Richard seemed about to argue, but then nodded. "There will be time." As they left the hospital, Ethan put his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "Thank you for what you said to him." "I meant it," Eleanor replied. "Life is too short for holding grudges, even against overbearing fathers-in-law who try to take over." "Your company?" Ethan asked with a small smile. "Even then," Eleanor confirmed, Besides, I have a feeling he's met his match in us. Richard's recovery took several weeks, during which a tentative truce developed between him and the young couple. While he wasn't ready to completely abandon his takeover plans, he became more willing to discuss compromise. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Ethan's relationship continued to deepen. They worked together during the day, building a shared vision for both companies that honored their respective family legacies. At night, they built a personal relationship based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and growing love. One evening, as they relaxed on the terrace of their penthouse, enjoying the spring air, Ethan brought up something that had been on his mind. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "The way we started, the deception." Eleanor considered the question. "I regret that I felt I needed to hide who I was, but I don't regret how things turned out." She looked at him. "What about you? Do you regret marrying me sight unseen?" "Never," Ethan said without hesitation, "though I admit when my father first told me about the arrangement, I was furious. I thought he was ruining my life." "And now?" Eleanor asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. Ethan pulled her into his arms. "Now I think it was the best thing that ever happened to me." "You're the best thing that ever happened to me." Eleanor rested her head against his. 6 months had passed since Richard's heart attack. The seasons had changed, summer sliding into fall, and with the changing weather came changes in both the Blackwood and Sinclair businesses. After weeks of negotiations, a new merger agreement had been reached, one that respected both companies' legacies while creating a stronger combined entity. Richard, humbled by his health scare, had become more willing to listen to Ethan and Eleanor's ideas. He hadn't completely softened. The old lion still had his claws, but there was a newfound respect in his eyes when he looked at his daughter-in-law. On a crisp October morning, Eleanor stood in front of the mirror in their bedroom, adjusting her blazer for the board meeting where the final merger documents would be signed. She still marveled sometimes at how much her life had changed in less than a year. From a reluctant bride hiding behind thick glasses to a confident businesswoman and a woman in love, the transformation felt almost unbelievable. Ethan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Ready for the big day?" "Almost," Eleanor said, leaning back against him. "Just a little nervous." "You're going to be amazing," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You always are." Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't shown you the real me that night? If I'd kept hiding?" "Sometimes," Ethan admitted. "But I think we would have found our way to each other eventually. Some things are just meant to be." "That's surprisingly romantic coming from the hard-nosed businessman," Eleanor teased. "What can I say? You've changed me." Ethan smiled, the warm, genuine smile that still made her heart skip. "For the better, I hope." "Definitely for the better," Eleanor assured him, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. "We should go," Ethan said reluctantly when they broke apart. "My father will be waiting, and you know how he hates tardiness." "Some things never change," Eleanor said with a small laugh. The boardroom at Blackwood Enterprises was packed with board members from both companies, lawyers, and key executives. At the head of the table sat Richard Blackwood, looking healthier than he had in months, though his hair had grown noticeably whiter since his heart attack. As Ethan and Eleanor entered, the room quieted. All eyes turned to the young couple who had defied expectations and created a new vision for the merged companies. "Ah, here they are," Richard said, standing to greet them. "Now we can begin." For the next hour, final details were discussed, documents reviewed, and questions answered. Throughout it all, Eleanor spoke confidently about the financial implications, impressing even the most skeptical board members with her knowledge and insight. "She's quite remarkable," Richard commented quietly to Ethan during a brief break. "I can see why you fought so hard for her." "She's the best thing that ever happened to me," Ethan replied, watching Eleanor across the room as she spoke with 2 board members. "And to the company," Richard nodded thoughtfully. "Your mother would have liked her. She always said you needed someone who would challenge you, not just agree with everything you said." "Mom was right about a lot of things," Ethan said, surprised by this rare mention of his mother, who had died when he was in college. Yes, she was, Richard agreed, a hint of old pain in his eyes. I should have listened to her more often. Before Ethan could respond to this unprecedented admission, the meeting was called back to order for the signing ceremony. One by one, the key players signed the merger documents. When it was Eleanor's turn, she felt a moment of sadness that her father wasn't there to witness this culmination of his life's work. As if reading her thoughts, Ethan squeezed her hand reassuringly before she picked up the pen. "George would be proud," Richard said when she had finished signing. "Both of the merger and of you." "Thank you," Eleanor said, touched by the unexpected kindness. After all the signatures were collected and the lawyers had confirmed everything was in order, Richard stood to address the room. "Today marks not just the joining of two great companies, but the beginning of a new chapter," he said, his voice strong despite his recent health problems. "Under the leadership of my son and his wife, Blackwood Sinclair Enterprises will be stronger than either company could be alone." Ethan and Eleanor exchanged surprised glances. This was the first time Richard had suggested they would lead the combined company together. "To that end," Richard continued, "I am announcing my official retirement as CEO of Blackwood Enterprises, effective immediately. Ethan will assume the role of CEO of the merged company, with Eleanor as Chief Financial Officer and Co-President." Applause filled the room, though a few of the older board members looked startled by the announcement. Richard had been expected to stay on for at least another year. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" Ethan asked when the meeting adjourned and they had a moment alone. "My doctor has been telling me to slow down for years," Richard said with a shrug. "And my recent episode made me realize I'm not immortal. Besides," he added with a hint of his old sharpness, "I'd rather leave on my own terms than be carried out feet first." "A wise decision," Eleanor said with a small smile, "though I hope you'll still be available for advice when we need it." "Count on it," Richard assured her. "I may be retiring, but I'm not dead yet. Speaking of which, when are you two planning to give me a grandchild? I'm not getting any younger, you know." "Dad!" Ethan protested. Eleanor laughed, linking her arm through Richard's. "We're working on it, I promise. Now, shall we go celebrate? I think this occasion calls for champagne." Later that evening, Eleanor sat alone in the library of their penthouse, a book open on her lap, but her mind elsewhere. The day had been a whirlwind of emotions, pride in what they had accomplished, nostalgia for her father, and excitement about the future. Ethan found her there, still in her business suit, staring out the window at the city lights. Penny 4. "Your thoughts," he said, sitting beside her on the window seat. "I was just thinking about my father," Eleanor admitted. "How he'd arranged our marriage thinking it would protect me, and how it ended up giving me everything I never knew I wanted." "Which is?" Ethan asked, taking her hand. "A true partner," Eleanor said, looking at him with love in her eyes. "Someone who sees me, the real me, and loves me anyway." "Not anyway," Ethan corrected gently. "Because of who you are, all of you, your brilliance, your kindness, your strength, even your stubbornness." "Hey," Eleanor protested with a laugh. "It's one of your many charms," Ethan assured her, pulling her closer. "One I've grown quite fond of, actually." Eleanor rested her head on his shoulder. "We've come a long way from that first awkward lunch, haven't we?" "We certainly have." Ethan pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I have something for you, by the way, a celebration gift." "Oh?" Eleanor looked up with interest as Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I know we're already married," he said, opening the box to reveal a stunning diamond ring, "but I never got to give you a proper engagement ring. And considering how our marriage started, I thought maybe we could use a symbol of what it's become." Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she looked at the beautiful ring. "It's perfect." "There's an inscription," Ethan said, taking the ring out of the box and showing her the words engraved inside. "To the real you with all my love." "Oh, Ethan," Eleanor whispered, as he slipped the ring onto her finger beside her wedding band. "I love you, Eleanor," Ethan said, his eyes shining with emotion. "Not for how you look, not for your company or your business skills, though all those things are wonderful. I love you for who you are, the woman I've come to know over these months together." "I love you too," Eleanor said, her voice catching. "So much more than I ever thought possible." As their lips met in a tender kiss, Eleanor marveled at the journey that had brought them here. From a business arrangement to true love, from masks and deception to complete honesty and trust. Their kiss deepened, and Ethan pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her hair. "What do you say we move this celebration to the bedroom?" he murmured against her lips. Eleanor smiled, her heart full of love for this man who had seen beyond her defenses to the woman beneath. "Lead the way, Mr. Blackwood." Later, as they lay together in the darkness, Eleanor's head resting on Ethan's chest, he traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "if someone had told me a year ago that I'd be happily married to a woman I'd never met, madly in love and running a merged company with her, I would have said they were crazy." "Life has a way of surprising you," Eleanor agreed, pressing a kiss to his chest. "Speaking of surprises, I have one for you too." "Oh?" Ethan looked down at her curiously. "What kind of surprise?" Eleanor took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "Your father's wish is coming true sooner than he thinks. We're going to have a baby." Ethan's eyes widened in shock, then filled with joy. "Are you serious? When? How long have you known?" "I just found out yesterday," Eleanor said, laughing at his excitement. "I'm about 8 weeks along according to the doctor. I was going to tell you after the merger was finalized, and then your father made that comment about grandchildren, and I nearly blurted it out right there." "A baby," Ethan said in wonder, his hand still resting protectively over her stomach. "Our baby." "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Ethan assured her, pulling her close for a kiss. "I'm ecstatic. Terrified but ecstatic." "Me too," Eleanor admitted. "I never saw myself as a mother. Growing up, I was so focused on proving myself in business, on making my father proud." "You're going to be an amazing mother," Ethan said with certainty. "Just like you're an amazing businesswoman, an amazing wife, an amazing everything." Eleanor smiled, feeling truly at peace for perhaps the first time in her life. "You know, for an arranged marriage, this turned out pretty well." "Better than pretty well," Ethan corrected, kissing her again. "It turned out perfect." 6 months later, Eleanor sat in her office at Blackwood Sinclair Enterprises, reviewing the quarterly reports. At 5 months pregnant, her condition was now obvious, her suit jacket unable to completely hide her growing bump. There was a knock at her door, and she looked up to see Ethan standing there with a bouquet of flowers. "What's this for?" she asked with a smile as he crossed the room to place the flowers on her desk and kiss her cheek. "Do I need a reason to bring my beautiful wife flowers?" Ethan asked innocently. "No, but you usually have one," Eleanor replied, knowing him too. Well, Ethan laughed. "You caught me. It's our 1-year anniversary of our first meeting, not our wedding. You remembered that?" Eleanor was touched. "Of course I did. It was the day my life changed forever, even if I didn't know it at the time." Ethan perched on the edge of her desk. "I was thinking we could recreate that first lunch. Same restaurant, same table." "That's sweet," Eleanor said, "but I hope you're not expecting me to wear the glasses and the severe bun." "God, no," Ethan said with feeling, making her laugh. "Though I have to admit there was something intriguing about you even then. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was a spark, a sense that there was more to you than met the eye." "And now you know all my secrets," Eleanor said, her hand resting on her belly where their child grew. "Not all of them, I hope," Ethan said with a wink. "I like that you can still surprise me." There was another knock at the door, and Richard entered without waiting for an answer. Despite his retirement, he still spent most days at the office, ostensibly as a consultant, but really because he couldn't stay away. "Am I interrupting?" he asked, noting the flowers. "Just reminding my wife how lucky I am," Ethan said, standing to greet his father. "What brings you here, Dad?" "The Thompson deal," Richard said, "all business as usual. They're trying to change the terms again." "Let me guess," Eleanor said, exchanging an amused glance with Ethan. "They want more time to secure financing." "Exactly," Richard confirmed. "I told them it was unacceptable, but they're insisting on speaking with the CEO. And I'm sure you politely directed them to me," Ethan said dryly. "Of course," Richard said, though his expression suggested his words had been anything but polite. "They're waiting in the conference room." "I'll handle it," Ethan said with a sigh. "Rain check on lunch?" he asked Eleanor. "Go," she said, with an understanding smile. "Save the deal, I'll be here." After Ethan left, Richard lingered, his eyes on the ultrasound photo prominently displayed on Eleanor's desk. "How's my grandchild doing?" he asked, his voice softening as it always did when discussing the baby. "Growing like a weed," Eleanor replied, patting her belly, "and kicking like a soccer player. The doctor says everything looks perfect." "Good, good," Richard said, clearly pleased. "You know, I've been thinking about spending more time at the lake house after the baby comes. It's peaceful there. Good place for a child to visit their grandfather." Eleanor smiled at this glimpse of the softer side of Richard Blackwood that had emerged since his heart attack. "I think that's a wonderful idea. The baby would love that." Richard nodded, seemingly satisfied. "You've been good for him, you know. For Ethan." "He's been good for me too," Eleanor said honestly. "And for the company," Richard added, because he couldn't help himself. "Profits are up 12% from last year," Eleanor laughed. "Some things never change, do they, Richard? At my age, my dear, it's better that way." With a nod that was almost affectionate, he left her office. Eleanor turned back to her work, but her mind kept drifting to the journey that had brought her here, from the plain, forgettable woman she had pretended to be to the confident executive. And soon-to-be mother she was now. The irony wasn't lost on her. By hiding her true self, she had found a man who loved her for exactly who she was. By entering a marriage of convenience, she had found real, lasting love. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Thompson meeting over. They caved. Meet me for a late lunch, same place where it all began." Eleanor smiled and texted back, "I'll be there in 20 minutes, don't be late." As she gathered her things to leave, Eleanor caught her reflection in the window of her office. Gone was the severe hairstyle and the thick glasses. Gone, too, was the uncertainty and fear that had once driven her to hide. In their place was a woman who knew her own worth, who was loved not despite who she was, but because of it. Ethan was waiting when she arrived at the restaurant, standing as she approached the table, the same corner table where they had first met. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said with a warm smile, pulling out her chair. "Mr. Blackwood," she replied, returning his smile as she sat down. "You look beautiful today," Ethan said, his eyes filled with love as he took in the sight of her, pregnancy making her glow. "Even with the extra 20 pounds, Eleanor teased. "Especially with it," Ethan assured her, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I fall more in love with you every day, you know." "Is that so?" Eleanor asked, her heart still skipping at his words even after all this time. "It is," Ethan confirmed, "and I plan to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much." As they shared lunch in the restaurant where their story had begun, Eleanor reflected on how appearances could be deceiving. She had hidden her beauty, thinking it would protect her heart. Ethan had presented himself as a cold businessman, hiding his capacity for love and compassion. But masks, no matter how carefully constructed, couldn't last forever. The truth always found its way to the surface, and sometimes, when the masks finally fell away, what was revealed was more beautiful than anyone could have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Just how lucky I am," Eleanor replied, squeezing his hand, "that my father forced me to marry you, that you saw through my disguise, that we found each other despite everything. I'm the lucky one," Ethan insisted, "and I plan to remind you of that every day for the rest of our lives." As his lips met hers in a tender kiss, Eleanor knew that this was what happily ever after truly meant. Not a perfect fairy tale ending, but a real love story, with all its complications and challenges and unexpected joys. A love built not on appearances or arrangements, but on seeing and accepting each other's true selves, masks and all. And in that moment, surrounded by the bustle of the restaurant where their journey had begun, Eleanor Blackwood knew with absolute certainty that she wouldn't change a single step of the path that had led her here, to this man, this love, this life that was more beautiful and fulfilling than anything she could have imagined. Some things, after all, were simply meant to be. The end.